Good evening, everybody. I'm Betsy Fischer Martin, the Executive Director of the Women in Politics Institute at American University, and welcome to our virtual series, Women on Wednesdays. We're glad that you could join us this evening. To those of you new to our events, WPI is a nonprofit and nonpartisan institute in AU's School of Public Affairs that aims to close the gender gap in political leadership. And we offer academic courses and practical campaign training, facilitate research, and of course, host discussions like this on women in politics. Tonight, we have the honor of speaking to a trailblazer in the political arena, the first female senator from Hawaii, and the first Asian American woman elected to the Senate, Mazie Hirono. We're so glad that she could be with us this evening. She's written a new book entitled Heart of Fire, An Immigrant's Daughter's Story. And she'll talk to us about her childhood immigrating to Hawaii from Japan and the many struggles that she and her family faced. And she'll also discuss lessons learned in her successful career in politics, having served as a state legislator, a lieutenant governor, a member of Congress, and of course now in her second term in the U.S. Senate. Before we start, I want to let everybody know that we will save plenty of time for questions. So if you do have a question during the course of our discussion, just go to the Ask the Question tab at the bottom of your screen, and you can write it in there, and you can also upvote other people's questions that you may be interested in as well. And if you miss any of our discussion and you want to share it with friends, the replay will be available at the very same link that you use to register. So with that, Senator, welcome.
Aloha, Betsy.
It is great to see you.
Great to be with you and everybody who's on this website or whatever, this thing. I'm sorry. Oh, welcome.
Well, we want to dive into the book here. And I noticed when I was, after I read the book, I went back and read a couple articles about the book, and one of them was from the New York Daily News, and the very first lead of that review of your book says, Hirono is tough, and as her autobiography proves, she has to be, because you really have had quite the life. So why don't you just start at the beginning with us and tell us a little bit about growing up, coming to the U.S. from Japan when you were just 8 years old?
I had a really courageous mother who literally planned and plotted in secret to escape a terrible marriage, abusive marriage to my father, who I didn't get to know. He was an alcoholic and a compulsive gambler, and he hid all that from her before he married her. So from the time I was 3 years old, I was sent to live with my maternal grandparents. But my mother determined that she had to get us away, completely away from him and his family. They treated her like a slave. And so she brought us to Hawaii, America, to start a new life. And so it's her heart of fire that gives the book the title.
And your mom went on to be a proofreader, right, at a newspaper?
Which is really awesome when you think that she did not finish high school in Hawaii. She was born in Hawaii, but when she was a teenager, she went to her parents took them back to Japan, where if all things were normal, she would have stayed. But as circumstances would have it. And so at one point she decided that she needed to get a better job. And so she applied to be a proofreader with basically an 8th grade American education. But the person who interviewed her knew that she was raising 3 kids all by herself and decided to give her a chance. And she became the best proofreader, the most hardworking proofreader there. That's the kind of mother I had. And of course, growing up, when we first started in Hawaii, we had very little. I'd say we were really poor. And my mother worked in very low paying jobs with absolutely no benefits. So she couldn't even afford to get sick, because if she got sick, there's no work, no pay, no rent, no food. That's how I grew up.
She was also an artist.
Very much so. She was very creative. And toward the time of her retirement, when I began to be in my political life, she started to make pressed flower cards, and she grew the flowers, and she learned how to press them. And so she made, over time, thousands of cards for me to use as thank yous for all of my supporters. And so she was very creative. She did all of the gardening in our house. She transformed our garden, our yard, into really a floral and plant paradise, in my view. She did all of that, and everything she undertook, she sought to do it well. And she would learn how to, do the plants, take care of them. She learned how to make guava jelly. Everything she would do with a great deal of patience, a lot more than I have.
Well, you write in the book some lessons from your mother, including standing up, saying your piece, and refusing to be oppressed.
Very much so. So, my mother taught me that one person can make a difference, because she totally changed my life by bringing me to this country. And she also stood her ground, and she was very committed, and she just persevered in what she did. And she was always trying to improve our lot in life. And she would, I read about a particularly mean landlord, and she stood up to him and said, "Well, we have to move out now." Stood up to him, and we did. But she showed me by her example to stand up for yourself.
Well, and you write about in high school working for the student newspaper. And you sort of interesting dive into, early kind of gender roles at that point, right? Because there was a situation that you were sort of stuck with all of a sudden a co-editor-in-chief when you should have been, by all rights, the editor-in-chief.
Well, apparently this kind of thing happens, a lot to women, where we're sort of the implementers and stuff like that. But, I had worked on the school newspaper for 3 years, and I was slated to become the editor-in-chief. And suddenly my news writing advisor says, "You're going to have a co-editor." And I said, "What?" And she said, "There's this boy. He's very talented. He's really smart, great writer. And he's going to join news writing. He's going to be your co-editor-in-chief." And at that point, it was a fait accompli. And it turned out, when he was recruited to be on the school paper, he actually said, this is how I was told it, that he said, "I won't come unless I can be editor-in-chief." And he was told that we already have an editor-in-chief. And so he settled for co-editor, but I got to do most of the work.
Yeah,
it happens a lot to women.
Yeah,
where you write standing for that sort of thing.
Yeah, where at one point you got completely fed up with doing all the work, right?
I basically did all the work, because that's what I have been doing for the paper, and he just kind of swoops in, and he was, in my view, quite the prima donna.
And as it would be, you went on to have a very long friendship with this little boy.
Life is full of surprises, Betsy. And as it turned out, yes, we became a couple years later. When we were both in college, and for quite a long time after. All told, 18 years.
Wow.
He had his good points, and then he also was quite competitive with me, which I think was very damaging to our relationship.
Yeah, and you write about that. Tell us a little bit about how you got interested in politics in the first place at a young age in college, right?
It was during the height still of the Vietnam War, and I worked one summer in a place called Waimanalo, where we worked with so-called disadvantaged Native Hawaiian youth, and there I met some anti-war activists. And from that point, I began to question the war. It's the first time that I had questioned what our government was doing. In high school, I actually supported the Vietnam War, having bought into this whole thing about, well, if Vietnam falls, then so will Cambodia, and so will Laos, and it's a domino theory, and how terrible communism will spread. I believed all that. But as I said, in college, I began to question the war. And so a lot of my activist friends turned to politics as a way to make social changes, because we said, well, marching and singing "We Shall Overcome" is just not enough. So many of us, and a whole group of us, went off to get further education. Generally it was law school, as it was for me. And we came back and started to run for office.
And you write about the decision you made to go to law school, which in many ways you phrase as sort of the need to have an extra degrees to be taken seriously by a lot of men in the political world at that time in Hawaii, right?
Yes. for a lot of women, we always feel as though we need to be much better prepared than the guys in order to
Mm-hmm.
do the same work. And so I decided that a bachelor's degree was not enough if I wanted to stay in the political arena. I wasn't intent to run for office myself, but I thought a law degree would be a good idea. So off I went. It was really important in this period that I had friendships with activists, as I said. And when the University of Hawaii created a law school, all my activist friends became the first year law students at the University of Hawaii Law School. But I determined that it was really important for me to go away to school, and I paid the money and all of that. But it was a very critical decision on my part to make my own way, and in my view, take a harder course than my friends did. Because I mean, I'm not knocking them, but it was something that I thought was really important for me. And as it turned out,
yeah,
it worked out.
Yeah, because when you were working in politics and you write about this, you felt like you were dismissed a lot. You looked young. People maybe didn't take you as seriously, and you were working as a chief of staff in the State House.
Yes. Well, that was one of the reasons that I decided that I really needed another degree in order to really be in the political arena, and so that I think a lot of women did that. At least my activist women friends did. So all of us went off to school. I think that there's far less of that kind of sentiment now. That women these days are very articulate, vocal, committed, and they are out there. So some things have changed in that. Right. I think young women these days, they are very committed at what they're doing, and they're not going to let some degree stop them from doing it.
Tell us at this point in the story about your connection to a future president.
When I was, I think I was still in college, and I decided that I would do some temp work to earn some money. One of the places I worked at was the largest bank in Hawaii, called the Bank of Hawaii, and there was a vice president named Madeline Dunham. She was the first female vice president at that bank, and she would call me every time she needed extra help. And it wasn't until many, 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 many years later, when Barack Obama was running for office, that I realized that was his much beloved grandmother who helped to raise him. To a large extent, she did raise him. So I knew his grandmother. And, life is full of surprises. But she told me that she was the first female vice president. And because she didn't have a college degree, people she trained, men, would be promoted ahead of her. And so the discrimination that she experienced, I think, played a part in Barack Obama's awareness of these gender discrimination and discrepancies.
You also mention in the book the influence that Betty Friedan had on you, and yes. Professionally and in your personal life, from reading her book, of course, The Feminine Mystique. Tell us how she impacted your life.
I was in college thinking that after I graduate, I would get married, have children, and that is the sexual stereotyping that the dominant culture pretty much put out there, and I bought into it until I read Betty Friedan's Feminine Mystique. And I realized that not only did I have this absolutely courageous mother who raised 3 children by herself, never remarried, why did I think that that I should follow a path that was very stereotypical? Not that there's anything wrong with that. And so I also asked myself, why should I expect some guy to come and take care of me? And I decided that I would need to find my own path. I just didn't know what that was going to be at that point. But literally a light bulb went on in my head when I read Feminine Mystique.
And then when you were in law school, I guess when you were in high school, you had started dating a young man named Leighton, and you kind of follow the reader. You can follow some of this drama in your book, but you write about sort of going away to law school. He's still in Hawaii, and you find out as many people do at these times, that, oh, he's seeing someone else.
How dare
So
he?
you promptly burn all of his pictures and letters in a big
Yes.
bowl.
Well, let's just say that I was quite decisive. So, yes, he was the first lawyer that I met who was my contemporary. Because while my friend Patsy Mink was a trailblazer and she was a lawyer, but she was not my generation.
Yeah.
And Leighton had gone straight to law school from college, and I did not. I went back to school 5 years after I had my undergraduate degree. So he was my first lawyer, and I'm thinking, wow, he got to go to law school. And then we started to go together, and I determined that when I went away to law school, he was supposed to wait for me, so he said. But I learned from that experience that sometimes guys just say things.
Right.
And so when I discovered he wasn't exactly waiting for me, I just hung up the phone and said, that's the end of our relationship. And that was that for basically 13 years until, as life would have it, the whole other story. So it kind of restores your faith in life that you're somebody who broke your heart way back when. I was actually very happy with him when I was with him. He was very fun and all of that. And I never thought that I would have ended up getting married to him, but it restored my faith in life to
Right.
have somebody come back into my life. And I have been married to him for over 30 years now.
So that's the spoiler alert. He turns out to be your husband.
Yes, and he's my wonderful husband whose goal in life is to make me happy, which I think is fantastic.
That's great. I love that story. Tell us about how you first decided to run for office. As the case, as we know, with many women, they're usually encouraged, right? And so you had some encouragement along the way of people that said, you've helped so many people run for office. Why don't you think to run yourself?
That's right. Up to that point, I had come back with my law degree, and I was working for the Attorney General's office, and I hadn't thought about running for office myself, but a friend who I had helped get elected decided not to run for re-election. He came to see me and he said, I'm going to tell you ahead of any public announcement that I am not going to run, and this area, and I think you should run because you've been encouraging the rest of us to run. And that's when I decided that I would do that.
You weren't
And I
necessarily kind of comfortable in that limelight, though. That was hard for you. You write about how you weren't very comfortable in the limelight. And so it was sort of hard for you to be the center of attention in many ways.
It's a whole different thing to become the candidate yourself as opposed to running other people's campaigns and basically behind the scenes. I am a reserved person. I'm very introspective. But I had a determination that I could do something to help people. And pretty early in life, I decided that my mother had changed my life, bringing me to this country. And I had opportunities in this country that I never would have had if she hadn't done that. I probably would have married a rice farmer in Japan because I was raised on a rice farm. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But I realized that this country gave me opportunities I never would have had, and I wanted to give back. And I thought that running for office is one way that I could do that. But believe me, it was very strange to be the candidate. And I read about when I was first running, and I knocked on a door, and I stood there, and I completely forgot what I was running for. It was so strange to be the candidate myself.
Right. Well, so you win your seat in the state legislature. And there you also encounter some issues with male colleagues dismissing you. And you tell a great story about standing up to some of them in regards to the custom of presentation of lay to honorees.
Well, that's one example.
Yeah.
The state legislature would honor various people, and then they would come to the floor of the House, and the women legislators were expected to jump up from our seats and give the lei to the males because most of the honorees are males. And the custom in Hawaii is that women present lei to the men and the men present lei to the women. There weren't that many women who were ever brought to the floor to be recognized, but my male colleagues would simply drop the lei off, and we're just supposed to figure out who's supposed to get it and jump up. And at one point I decided pretty early on after I got elected that I wouldn't do it. So when a colleague dropped the layout, I said, what is that? And he said, you have to give this to whoever. I said, I don't do lay. He said, what? He said, I don't do lay. He looked very perturbed by it, but he took the lay away. And so they stopped putting lay on my desk until one of my friends said, I think you can stop now. You've made your point, and now you're getting a reputation as a hard ass, so you can stop. So I made my point, and after that, the men were much more, they wouldn't just drop the lay. They would say, do you think you could give this to so-and-so, please? Oh, what can I say?
Yeah. And you also, I mean, you just alluded to this, but you also got a nickname during your time in the state legislature.
Ice Queen.
Yeah.
Because I was relatively young, and there weren't that many women in the legislature. I was determined to be very professional about it, and I didn't flirt. I didn't go out drinking with the guys. I didn't do any of that. And so behind my back, I found out later that they called me Ice Queen. Mm-hmm. Didn't bother me.
So you're in the state legislature. Then you decide that you want to make a run for lieutenant governor. But you're told, as again, women often are, oh, it's not your turn.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because running for a statewide seat is a big deal. I had never had to raise very much money to run for my state house seat, but suddenly I'm looking at least $500,000. And it was a daunting prospect, but I decided that I was going to change arenas and run for statewide office. Now, the thing about Hawaii is that there are only 4 statewide offices in the entire state of Hawaii, and it's the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the 2 U.S. senators. That is it. We don't have other opportunities to run for other offices such as attorney general, insurance commissioner, or any of those. And so I decided to run for lieutenant governor. And yes, I was told by a number of people, you didn't prepare enough to win this race. Who do you think you are? And all of that. Well, I was quite determined to do it, and so I did. But as you say, there are a lot of women. I know few women who have not experienced in their jobs in any walk of life being told you're not ready, you're not prepared, you can't lead. And we have to stop listening to those voices, and yet be very realistic about our own chances of winning. That is on us to make that determination. But there are sometimes all these voices telling us it's not our turn.
And then how did you make the decision to make a run for governor after you won the lieutenant governor's race, right? Served there and then decided to make a run for governor?
I thought I could be a good governor, especially as I had watched the governor, the person who was governor with me, and he was a fighter, but he didn't exactly bring people together. I thought I could do that. I thought I could be a good governor. And having served for 8 years as lieutenant governor and accomplishing some things which very few people know about, including, by the way, starting a preschool program for some of the schools. And notice that that's being hotly debated now, universal preschool, which I really believe in. But I digress. Anyway, 8 years serving as lieutenant governor. Frankly, what is generally thought to be the next step, if you want to continue to serve, is the governor's race. And that's when the knives really came out, and people came to see me, including the senior U.S. senator, telling me that I couldn't win, I shouldn't run. And there were even efforts to turn all the big unions that I have worked with over all these years serving in the state legislature as well as lieutenant governor, to turn all these unions against me. And so it was the toughest race I'd ever run. It took a huge toll emotionally, psychically, and everything else. But I just persevered.
And these were people in your own party.
Oh, yes.
Telling you this. Yeah.
It's the kind of thing where you say, with friends like this, who needs enemies?
Right.
But they didn't think I could win, so they have very little faith in me. And 2, I was the girl, and the Democrats had never had a woman as their gubernatorial candidate. And they didn't think I could do it. They didn't think I could win. So this happens a lot to women who run for the highest executive office, either for in the state or clearly for president. And I have spoken with Hillary Clinton, and yes, all these attitudes come out
Right.
about how we should behave running for the highest executive office, and often it has to do with whether we can lead and
Right.
whether we're tough enough.
Right. And, that issue of electability, and the more people say you're not electable, the more you become not electable because you don't have the support. And it's like a terrible cycle that happens to women.
Yes. Well, fortunately, we do see more women running for office and getting elected, and especially critical are the women who get elected to governorships, in my view, because these kinds of attitudes do not arise in any other races except, in my view, in my experience, than for the highest executive office. Why? Because that's where there's a lot of power in one person when you're the governor or when you're the president, and not as much when you're running for even for the U.S. House or U.S. Senate, important as those positions are.
And so you were actually running against another woman on the Republican side,
Yes.
Lingle, who, by the way, Senator, I don't know if you saw in the chat, but she's watching tonight and wrote a very nice note about how terrific your book is. And
I think this is another Linda Lingle. I happen to know.
Oh, it is?
The first Linda
Oh,
Lingle.
my goodness, there's more than one?
Yeah, the Linda Lingle who won the race is not, in my view, not the original Linda Lingle.
Oh, well, you've got another Linda,
I know the
Lingle
fan who's on this, and so I should say hi there, Linda.
Hi, other Linda. So, but what were the lessons that you took out of that race, having lost?
One thing is, though, that to understand that to run a modern campaign where you're dealing with social media, which was emerging at that time, and all the other new ways that one can campaign, that you need a professional staff in order to do it. And so in my race in Hawaii, Democrats up to that point have been relying completely on volunteers, even to run a huge race like the governor's race. And so all of my people were volunteers. Meanwhile, Linda Lingle, who ran the Republican, she had probably at least 22 paid staff people. One thing I learned from that experience was that you need to raise the money to hire the people, the good people who can help you win a race. But you also need the cadre of volunteers. So I learned a lot from that loss. You can win a lot from losing.
Right, exactly. And you write about sort of the notion when one door closes, another one opens, right?
My mother said that.
And so you run for Congress, and this time you do exactly what you just said, right? You hire a top-notch staff and have success. Yes,
and I was criticized for hiring people from the mainland, mainly. But the thing is that in Hawaii, because campaigns are done by volunteers, they actually have jobs. So it's not as though we have a cadre of people who only do campaigning, whereas on the mainland, there are people who go from state to state doing these campaigns, and we didn't have that. We have wonderful people in Hawaii, but we have very few who do campaigning as a career or job.
You also talk about the importance of building networks, especially among women, and the importance of women supporting other women in politics.
Yes, because generally speaking, maybe that's changing. I hope so, that women have a harder time raising money. Women have a harder time asking for money. And so it is true that we certainly do not have parity in the House or the Senate or in the governorship. So women, we should, in my view, we should help women, qualified women, to run for office and get elected. And that means helping them raise money, and which is one of the reasons that I am one of the founders of the Patsy Mink Political Action Committee. That was that we worked really hard. It's the only PAC of its kind in Hawaii that supports pro-choice Democratic women running for state office. And tell us, for those who don't know that may be watching, who Patsy Mink was. Patsy Mink was a trailblazer. She was the first person of color to ever get elected to the Congress in either the House or the Senate. She's from Hawaii, and she understood discrimination. She is the originator of Title IX, which was renamed the Patsy Mink Education Opportunity and Education Act, I believe. But it has to do with equality in education. And when Patsy applied to medical schools, she was told that they wouldn't accept her because she was a woman. And then she applied to various law schools. So she went to the Chicago Law School, where she was seen as a foreign student, law student. And then when she got out of law school, she couldn't get a job. So she was a trailblazer. She ran for Congress. She ran for a lot of offices that she didn't win, but she just kept picking herself up. She ran for U.S. Senate, she did get elected U.S. House. She ran for president of the United States at one point. She ran for governor. She ran for mayor, and she just kept going. And she sadly died in office, and that's when I ran for her seat in the U.S. House in 2006.
Right. And then you served several terms, and then the Senate seat, one of the Senate seats came open when Daniel Akaka retired.
Yes.
This was 2012, I believe.
Yes.
And here you are, speaking of Lingle, having to run a rematch now against her for the Senate. And this time, of course, handily beating her.
Yes.
But that was a risky decision for you, because you could have lost if you didn't win, you could have lost your House seat as well.
Yes, but having a safe situation was never my guiding decision, basis on which I made decisions. So I decided, though, that while I would have to raise millions and millions and millions of dollars and probably take on this very same person who beat me for governor, that I didn't want to have a regret about it. And so I decided that this is what I'm going to do, and all hands on deck. And as it turned out, yes, both my primary opponent and my general election opponent were people that had run in the governor's race 10 years ago. And I beat them, but I got a lot of questions about, how are you going to beat Linda Lingle? She beat you the last time 10 years ago. And I said, I learned a thing or two in the 10 years. And when the reporters asked me, what did you learn? I said, I learned how to win.
That was great. And you have another funny story that you tell in the book about the quadruple dose of diversity that you would bring to the Senate.
When I made my announcement, and I had a gathering of supporters, and I said, look at the Senate. They need a lot more diversity. And I would bring quadruple diversity to the Senate. One, I'm a woman. Two, I'm Asian. I would be the first Asian woman to get elected if I succeed. Third, I'm an immigrant. And right now, I'm the only immigrant serving in the Senate. And I'm a Buddhist. I'm the only Buddhist, as far as I know, ever to be elected to the U.S. Senate. And somebody in the crowd yelled out, yeah, but are you gay? And I said, nobody's perfect. That became Chuck Schumer's one of his favorite campaign stories. And as I campaigned all across the country with other female candidates, he'd say, Mazie, tell that story.
It's a great story. So you're in the Senate, and you again have to kind of navigate some gender issues, but you also write about kind of navigating how people may have misjudged you. And you tell a story about one of your colleagues, Barbara Mikulski, who, of course, was a pioneer in her own right in the Senate. But she sort of misjudged you. And you ended up, having a discussion with her about sort of your demeanor, and her thinking that maybe you didn't have as much of a commitment, or you weren't, because you were so non-confrontational and a little bit more demure.
Barbara and I did not serve on any committees, because if she had seen me on the Judiciary Committee working on comprehensive immigration reform when I first got elected, I think she would have had a different measure, taken a different measure of me. But I tend to be very reserved, and I am not one of the most vocal people in the Senate. And so she began to basically, I would say, lecture me about how I should be in the Senate if I wanted to get on the committee that she happened to be chairing, which was appropriation. And I was really taken aback when she started in on that. But when I had another opportunity where she began to also say, as I was telling Mazie, she needs to do this or that, I said, you know very little about my culture, my background, and what it took for me to get here. And I am not here to, I'm not asking for advice from you. So that she immediately stopped. But since then, she's seen me use my voice.
Yeah.
And, I have always admired Barbara. She is a huge fighter. And she has seen the fight in me because I am so much more vocal now
Right.
about the battles I fight. But Barbara and I are good friends, and I admire her very much. But back then, when that came about, I think it did have to do with some kind of a view she had about me as an Asian woman.
Yeah. And you do write about.
She no longer has that view, by the way.
Right, of course. And you write about finding your voice, and you also write about a very emotional floor speech that you gave that sounded to me like it was a little bit of a turning point for you in the Senate, where you were delivered some remarks in a very authentic and emotional way during the debate on Obamacare.
Mm-hmm. Let me just say that, yes, when I began to be a lot more vocal
Yeah.
during the Trump years because
Yeah.
of all the terrible things that was happening, and people did write about it, I found my voice. No, I use
Yeah.
my voice.
Yeah.
We all have voices. I use my voice. And that speech that you're referring to was a healthcare speech. And I had already gone to rallies and given floor speeches, etc. And that was the last night. It was a very dramatic evening of debate on whether or not we were once again going to repeal basically the Affordable Care Act and thereby pushing millions of people off healthcare. And I thought, do I have anything more to say? Now, by this time, I had my cancer diagnosis. I was on medication, and my communication director said, if you have something more to say, this would be a good time to say it. I didn't have anything prepared. Very few senators go on the floor of the Senate without something prepared, but I really thought it was important. And so I didn't use a podium, which is, yet another thing that I could lean on. I decided that I would just be very open, literally. And I spoke without prepared remarks. And I talked about the death of my sister in Japan. I think she could have been saved. She died from pneumonia. She could have been saved if we had proper health care in the part of Japan. And I had never talked about my sister. I certainly rarely talk about my family in that way. And so that was in my view, I really opened myself up to a way of sharing something that had happened to me and that was happening to millions of people across the country. So that speech has been viewed over 1 million times.
Wow.
And a lot of people have came up to me during that period to share their cancer stories and their stories about their huge healthcare issues. And I think it was really important. I really began to recognize the value of speaking plainly and in a genuine way.
And you alluded to this a minute ago too, but sort of your very vocal, outspoken remarks about then President Trump during his election and tenure in the White House, calling him, the most dangerous president of our lifetime, et cetera. Talk about the importance that you felt at sort of and the notion of women expressing outrage, because you write about that in your book, especially when women are showing anger and being criticized for being sort of out of control.
That's really how I would say men would control women.
Yeah.
By responding that way to our righteous anger. So yes, Rebecca Tracer wrote about anger. Other people have written about women who get angry, and there was a lot to get angry about during the Trump years. And yes, I did begin to really use my voice about what he was doing. And one of the other experiences I had, which really got over my public speaking is not exactly easy for anybody. Certainly isn't for me. Talking to the press, I rarely did that in the beginning years of my congressional time. But one thing I don't like is a bully, and Trump was the biggest bully of them all, and you have to stand up to bullies. So I spoke to a spray at one point. It's the first time I did a spray, which is a whole group of members of the media, print media, all of these TV stations, and they position themselves at a hallway where they expect members to be passing by. And I happened to be going to my Judiciary Committee hearing. And once again, my chief of staff said, because I've been really upset by something that Trump said about my Kirsten Gillibrand. And he said, if you're still upset, why don't you just go up here to the spray and tell them? So I stepped up and I said, Trump is a liar and admitted sexual predator. He's a misogynist. And the only thing that will save us from being attacked, because he attacks anybody who's against him, is his resignation. And that was that, I just kind of walked off after that. But it was a moment for me to be able to confront all these people with their microphones. And yes, we need to use our voices against bullies. That's my view.
We have a number of questions that I want to get to here. So let me just start with this one from Lucy, who says, and this is sort of a good next step question, says, you built your career step by step, state legislature, lieutenant governor, House, Senate, as we talked about. What's next for you? Are there other paths to power for women today?
What's next for me is to help my colleagues get reelected, to retain the Senate, to increase the number of Democrats, frankly, in the Senate, because it is the Democrats who are really working hard. I know this is a nonpartisan group, but frankly, who pushed the rescue plan that put hundreds of millions of dollars into vaccination and into safe reopening of schools and so many other aspects. So sure, I'd like to see, I'd like to support like-minded people to get elected, especially women. Right. We need more women in the Senate. And thankfully, there are a number of really articulate women, minority women who got elected to the House. And I love watching them on the floor and on TV. We need more women leaders and decision makers in all walks. And that's what I'll be spending my time doing.
Well, I think everybody on with us tonight would agree with you for sure on that. Here's another question. This is from Julie, who says, confidence and a sense of humor appear to be your winning combination. What other skills and personality traits do you think are helpful for women to succeed in politics?
I think a sense of humor, but also being a straight shooter. And not being afraid to, and once in a while I do swear. And I think that when terrible things are happening, if you don't swear once in a while, you're not paying attention.
You dropped a couple of F-bombs in the book.
Yes.
And I was listening to the audio version. I said, whoa.
I mean, what kind of double standard is that men can swear? And so, yes, I do swear. Not, unprovoked, however, in my
right.
And I think, I just want to get back a little bit to women and their anger. I think men are afraid of women who get angry. And I think that we should own our anger. There's a lot to be angry about. And that anger can be channeled into doing things that will help, so that we won't have so much anger, because there's a lot of injustice and everything else in this world. And so women's anger is something that it doesn't scare me, and I don't mind being called badass. Badass is a woman who doesn't really care what other people think of her. Of course I care. I would like to be liked, but it doesn't. I'm not going to be just so out of whack because somebody thinks I'm a terrible person, because Fox News comes after me quite often.
Yeah. This is another question from Lucy, and I think this is from her Women in Politics class, who I know is watching tonight. The question is, have you found it difficult to pass legislation that focuses on women issues throughout your legislative career?
I think that when women come together, and a lot of the issues are family issues, but
Hmm.
one example of women coming together, when I was in the state legislature, a group of the women, we would propose legislation that would help especially women, such as reforming our rape laws, things like that, and these things wouldn't pass, and so we said we're going to create a women's caucus, a bipartisan women's caucus, and when we first proposed it, the men, our colleagues, said, "Oh, you don't want to do that? Don't you want to work with us?" So we spent another session, legislative session, not getting these bills passed. So we said, "Okay, we're now going to form a women's caucus," and we
Hmm.
reached out to the women's advocacy groups in the community, and we would come up with a slate of legislation, and all of these would pass because at this point, the guys didn't want to be anti-women. So one way is to really reach out to other women coming together in a bipartisan way and getting things done, and of course reaching out to the enlightened males out there. There are enough of them to get things done, but to be focused and to have a strategy, you can do it. It's not easy, especially in this environment with so much divisiveness. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry. I think someone asked me whether I had other interests. I do. I love art. And you can see
Hmm.
behind me, these are all um,
Are these yours?
quilts. No, I wish. I love art. And for my DC apartment, I have art quilts that I have purchased over time. I also love paintings, and I do ceramics myself. Not good enough to sell or anything, but to have that creativity, which I think is really important for me to have much more of a balance in my life. But also in a time when things are changing so fast, I think being creative is one of the ways that we adjust to these changes. So I'm always pushing for art and creativity in our lives.
And you also have taken up your mom's um,
Hmm.
artistic letter pressing stationery, but you've put your own twist on it now, right?
My mother, as I said, made beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful press flower
Yeah.
cards for me to use. And anybody who's read the book, the hard cover of my
Uh-huh.
book, has seen pictures of my mother's cards as well as my cards. And my take on card making is that I make my own paper,
Hmm.
and I put bits of flora and fauna in it. And often, right now with autumn leaves, when I'm walking around, I pick up leaves and I incorporate those into my paper. So I am carrying on my mother's art in that way. And when I make my cards, I think of my mom and all that she did for me and all that
Yeah.
she taught me.
Well, along those lines, here's a question from Isabel who says, Hawaii is incredibly far from Washington. How do you bring Hawaii with you to your work in the Senate? And are there certain traditions and practices that you keep up in the office to remind you of home and to stay connected with your home state and your constituents?
Hawaii is the aloha state. Aloha means love, and you don't have to be in Hawaii to express that. And so I hope that I bring some of that aloha spirit and uh, the the appreciation I have for the multicultural state that Hawaii is. So I have a deep appreciation for other cultures, other practices, other foods,
Hmm.
and I'd like to see so much more of that. Diversity is a strength in Hawaii, and my hope is that it becomes a strength for our country. Because, frankly, unless you are the original peoples here, the rest of us are all immigrants or refugees or asylum seekers who are in this country, and we all came from elsewhere. And so there's a great diversity that should be a strength in our country. So I bring all of that kind of appreciation to my office.
How
In
often
fact,
are you able to go back to Hawaii?
my conference rooms have uh, basically Japanese names, so
Mm.
musubi and bento. I'm sorry, there was a
I was
question.
I was just asking how often are you able to get back to Hawaii? Such a long flight.
When we have recesses, so
Yeah.
usually once a month or so, I go back and I touch bases with people in Hawaii, and of course with Zoom you can Zoom with people in Hawaii from here too, which
Right.
is still what I do also.
Right. The benefits of now everybody knows how to use it, right? Let's see. Here's a question from Sydney who asked, "What do you think is your greatest legislative accomplishment to date?"
I particularly look to help people who may be totally ignored. So one of the groups that I really care about are the COFA citizens. Most people don't even know who they are. These are Micronesians, Marshallese, Palauans, and they were kicked off of any ability to access Medicaid for decades. And so ever since I got to the Senate, I've been wanting to restore Medicaid eligibility to a group of people who can come to our country without waiting for visas, because we have pacts with them, basically military, national security pacts. So it took me 8 years to accomplish that, and it's those kinds of things that that I'm particularly proud of. I'm not looking for the huge legacy things, because we all work on the big legacy things, but it's the individuals and groups that would be ignored. The other thing that I'm very proud of is much more recent, and that is the COVID-19 hate crimes bill. And that was a bipartisan bill that when I first introduced it, I couldn't get a single Republican to co-sponsor it. But by the end of it, there was only one negative vote. There was only one Republican who voted against it. So during a time when there was such a rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans, and I saw more Asian American voices speaking out as a group that has often been deemed the other, the perpetual foreigner, invisible. And this was a time when so many people came out and said, this has got to stop. So that hate crimes bill is one of the ways that we can stop this kind of hate crimes against a group of people. But you know what? It's not just, the bill doesn't just refer to Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, but it's any group that is targeted for hate.
You mentioned the difficulty in passing bipartisan legislation, and there's a question we have about that from Nina, who says, or Nina, I'm sorry, it's who says, is it possible to pass bipartisan legislation, and what more can be done to bring the two parties together? What are your thoughts on that?
This kind of divisiveness that we see in our country, where even the opening of schools has become politicized. The safety of our children, the safety of our communities has become politicized. It's going to take, I don't have the answers to that, but I do think that we need to continue to push for those programs and bills that will actually support our families, such as the rescue plan that not a single Republican voted for, but that sent hundreds of millions of dollars to safely reopen schools, get vaccinations, a whole slew of things. And we're working on Build Back Better, once again, without any Republican support. So I do not have the answers on how we can bring people together when there's so much divisiveness. I think that, sad to say, we have not dealt adequately with racism in our country. We have not dealt really with the legacy of slavery in our country, and the fact that we often view people who are not like, well, the majority as foreigners, others, and to be marginalized. We need to overcome all of that. And one of the ways, I think, is to somehow have a lot more diversity represented in our courts, obviously in the halls of Congress, and to see faces like mine. I hope that we're not scary people, and we care and we love this country just as anybody else. And so we will have to keep plugging away at the kinds of bills that matter to our families and our communities.
Well, and that kind of goes along with the last question we have here about how your own identity has shaped your leadership.
I think it's a bit more in Hawaii. The racial issues are not as pronounced as it is on what we call the mainland, because I know so many AAPIs who have really suffered from overt discrimination on the mainland. But for me, it was more gender issues, which is also pretty universal, that women would be told, you know, you're not ready, and all of that. And so I think that there are certain kinds of experiences that I have had that are shared regardless of what racial background you have. But being Japanese, so being Asian, and also the culture, the local culture that I come from, and the Asian culture, where being vocal and speaking out is not is not very much acknowledged or encouraged, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
That for me to use my voice, it has been really getting out of my comfort zone, and that's one of the things that I think I would encourage everyone to get out of your comfort zone, and you'd be surprised how expansive your world becomes when you do that, and then you find out you can do a heck of a lot more
Right.
than you thought you could.
Well, that's a great piece of advice to end on, Senator. Thank you for that. And I want to let everyone know of 2 more events we have coming up, and hope you'll join us next Wednesday when we have Dr. Rebecca DeWolf, who is going to discuss her new book called Gendered Citizenship, the Original Conflict Over the Equal Rights Amendment from 1920 to 1963, which will be really interesting. It's a great book. And then on December 8th, we're going to have Congresswoman Barbara Lee from California, and filmmaker Abby Ginsburg, who just directed and produced a new film about Congresswoman Lee called Barbara Lee Speaking Truth to Power. So we will have a screening link available to anyone who registers for that, and hope you can watch the documentary before our conversation. And Senator, thank you once again for being with us. It's great to see you. And congratulations on the book. I enjoyed reading it very much. And thank you for all of your good advice this evening.
Everybody stay safe, be kind.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Aloha.